My name is Siil, and I will be your moderator for a panel coming up now, which is on the topic how to build an ecosystem to raise adoption of privacy technologies. We heard a minute ago a keynote presentation by Ryo Kikuchi from Eurostat and heard several ideas and proposals how MPC adoption could be more supported, especially in the area of official statistics. And I have prepared for you a list of questions, which I hope we can manage to cover throughout this short but hopefully intense 40 minutes, starting with the actual problem posed in Fabio Ricciato's presentation. So he claimed that the adoption of MPC and other privacy-enhancing technology has been slow. But he didn't really dive into some of the obstacles behind that slow adoption. And I was wondering how you see this. What are the obstacles for a wider adoption of multi-party computation, as well as other privacy-enhancing technologies? And I see people nodding already, so I guess I will first hand over the ball to Tim, and perhaps let's hear the views from Australia, followed by Japan first.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. So a lot of the work that we do is actually helping and supporting clients to understand what are privacy-enhancing technologies, and that is both from a technology, a legal, and a compliance perspective. And so a lot of the discussions that we're starting to have is around the education process, and that happens at multiple different levels. We're lucky enough to be helping and supporting our privacy regulators around understanding what these actual technologies are used for, what are the complexities that are actually required, and what are the typical use cases. And so it's interesting. I think everyone shares the discussion that the adoption of multi-party computation, homomorphic encryption, PETs has been slow because the opportunity is so significant there. What we find when we're talking to our clients is that it's actually the discussion between technology, privacy, and legal that is such an interesting situation that we find ourselves in. And organizations in adapting these technologies need to make an assertion as to what does it mean from a privacy, from a data governance, from a cybersecurity, from an identity perspective. Then one of the things I think Fabio sort of talked about too is this idea from a central view of trust to multiple different other entities, and the opportunity to start to cross-collaborate with other third-party organizations has huge potential. But on the other side, we then need to look at, as soon as we always talk to, one-to-one level of trust is high. As soon as we start to bring other entities into that collaboration, trust degrades significantly. And so then you also have a look at what's required to actually adopt these techniques and technologies. And you think about the data, making sure the data schemas are correct, understanding and agreeing to the actual queries that's going to be made, looking at the data governance, the compliance, the regulatory factors. So for us, that's what we do every day. And we're finding that there is such a level of great interest starting to come up from an Australian, from Asia Pacific, from what we're hearing from Deloitte colleagues around the world at the moment. So it's a really, really exciting time. But I think the biggest challenge at the moment is the intersect between technology, legal, and regulatory compliance, and how do everywhere, that translation that needs to happen between all different sectors. So thanks, sure. That would be my opinion.
Thank you. Ryo, would you agree, or is that different from what you see in your work?
Yeah, I think that I thought another reasons for slow adoption of MPC. I think one of the reasons for slow adoption is that there's no simple security baseline or standard for MPC. Namely, MPC has many security levels and many models, and each of which may be weak or strong. This is actually true technically, but this is also difficult for users to understand the difference and may prevent MPC adoptions. For example, if vendor A says that this MPC is secure, but vendor B says this is a very weak model. If so, MPC will look like a very suspicious technology to users. So I think that it is required to unify the way of explanations, and I think we should agree on a simple and unified security baseline of MPC. And in fact, for these reasons, we have established a secure computation study group in Japan and published the baseline there.
So this is what you are dealing with. You are actually eliminating the obstacles directly.
Yes.
I see. But what do you, I mean, when we think about MPC, then you also said that MPC as a technology, but is it merely a technology? You know, MPC could be used in different relationships and situations, but how could it be, how could this no single point of trust be more supported or more better taken up?
So definitely the no single point of trust and or no single point of failure is an interesting feature of MPC, and it may take a while to get used to it. Making maybe a little bit of connection to the slowness of adoption. I would say that, and relating it to this no single point of failure, I think it's important to have some words of caution. One is that by having multiple parties, one is effectively also increasing the attack surface. And so there may be cases where, in fact, security may be degraded if we don't have a good solution. Another point of importance, I think, is that MPC on its own, when we talk about MPC as a solution, MPC does not directly convey the type of solution that we have because there are multiple models. One important aspect is, as an example, is that we have models where the input parties, which might be the parties that are interested in the security of their own data or privacy of their own data, are not the processors of that data. And so in some models, actually parties have to relinquish control of their data. And so that's a different model of computation. And then we have other models where the input parties are actually processors of the data, and so they may retain that control. But sometimes when MPC is offered as a solution, it's not clear which of those models we have.
I see. So you're saying that there's more work needed in terms of how to divide the roles in specific situations, because MPC enables different models, but it's not clear which models work in which situations the best way.
I think it may be clear often for experts, but I think often the way MPC is sold as an idea, it doesn't make clear what we're talking about. And so I would say that a significant challenge in this area is understanding on the part of stakeholders, namely those that are supposed to trust the MPC solutions.
Maybe if I can just echo that, a lot of the requests that we have is actually from a Deloitte perspective, participating as that independent third party as a way of helping and mitigating some of that level of mistrust that occurs, you know, validating and verifying that the data that's being ingested is what was agreed to, that the queries were there. And while we all know that a lot of the systems have that level of transparency and governance in there, a lot of the times what we're finding is these are highly regulated industries, and the types of queries are typically trying to tackle things that they haven't been able to do before. Let's take financial services with anti-money laundering or sharing of information between peer-to-peer banks in healthcare, in pharmaceuticals, looking at multiple different ecosystems within there. And so a lot of that, it comes down into, and the request we get is exactly to your point, helping and validating and verifying that everyone's acting in the right way.
So you are basically also saying that MPC might not replace necessarily these trusted third-party business models, but rather maybe complement them or bring new kinds of working models.
I do, and I think like most people share, like we see most privacy enhancing technologies are not a silver bullet to being compliant with any privacy regulations, nor do they take away any intrinsic mistrust that is there. But the benefit typically outweighs that. And when we look at it, let's take away the technology layer, but we're looking at what are the business outcomes that we're trying to achieve. They typically take that business outcome is significantly greater than the potential risk factor. And that's where there are going to be organizations like ours and technology players and others that come in and still help and support that framework to operate. I think we're just doing it in a significantly secure way than we've ever had that opportunity to do before.
Meiko, what do you think? Is this story convincing that MPC really, considerably lowers risks, brings more security, also in terms of privacy regulations and GDPR, for example, data protection?
Excellent question. So the problem here that I see from the perspective of someone who worked on mapping the legal requirements, especially from GDPR to the technical world of how to apply multi-party computation, how to apply PETs to IT systems, it's really, the answer the lawyers typically give is it depends. So you can have excellent benefits, you can have really good security guarantees, you can enable scenarios of data sharing that you could normally not do because people would not like to share their data, either for privacy and data protection reasons or for business secret reasons or whatever. On the other hand, you have to always have a look at the regulations. And when you look at GDPR, there are lots of pitfalls that you can fall into. There are lots of things that you take liability for when you decide to adopt multi-party computation in your IT systems. And there are some specifics of the GDPR that somehow even hinder adoption of PETs in that respect. For instance, we have this concept of data controller and data processor. You always have one responsible data controller, and that one is liable for all the processing and also for the processing at the processors if the supervision is not perfectly realized. So the challenge here is if you have a multi-party setup, who is the data controller? I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying that the legal system here is not perfectly adaptable to the technical system, the technical idea of multi-party computations. You have this liability problem. We're not talking about single point of trust. We're talking about, single point of liability in that sense. And that, of course, is a very challenging part when you try to realize it in a multi-organizational way. On the benefit side, however, we have lots of opportunities that actually, where multi-party computation actually helps complying with GDPR. We have lots of scenarios. Let's take one example, cloud computing, typical red flag for all the European companies, like, well, it's other countries, other legislations, not a secure third party in the United States, these types of trouble. And here, multi-party computation really can help, as the European Data Protection Board has clearly stated in the recommendations. They can be used as a tool to implement the necessary safeguards when processing data in cloud computing environments in the United States. Again, this is not a silver bullet. Again, this has this issue, who is liable and how do you set it up? You cannot just easily take two virtual machines at some cloud provider and run your system there and say, hey, it's two virtual machines, it's multi-party, it's fine. It must be organizational, it must be even legislational, separated over several countries, as the Data Protection Board has stated. Otherwise, it won't help you much. So devil is in the details, as always, but there clearly are some benefits when you utilize multi-party computations that help you in complying with GDPR in the end. So it's definitely a starter for the future.
And yet there is still the dream. I believe I've come to understand there's a dream among the MPC community that somehow MPC might even get us help us escape from the GDPR entirely, because it's so strong, it's so good, it's so innovative and novel that it doesn't fit into the GDPR framework, because it helps to, well, in GDPR terms, it helps to essentially anonymize data. Now, this is something that I call it a dream because it's it's something that needs to be verified. And when we listened to Fabio's presentation, then he specifically said that at least from official statistics perspective, they do not see MPC as a way to elude or escape GDPR, rather that they see it indeed as a technical and organizational measure to protect data while processing. So it doesn't help to escape in any way. But how do you how do you see this? Do you agree with this? Is it a useful strategy, or rather should we still try to reach for the dream and you know, help or use MPC to bring on a new kind of way of data processing entirely? So lawyers should instead embrace the new understanding from the technical side.
So you should always go for the dream. That's of course true, but let's say the problem here is, and that's definitely correct, you won't get completely out of GDPR as it is now. You won't be able to, in many scenarios, you won't be able to anonymize to an extent that there is no residual risk left with processing the data. So in that scenarios, GDPR still applies. There are definitely scenarios where you can shape the data in a multi-party computation setting in such a way that you really have anonymized, not linked to person data. And then it, of course, can be processed out of GDPR. For the majority of data types, well, the problem is to guarantee that data really is anonymized to a sufficient degree. We saw lots of examples where people thought that data would be anonymized and processed in an anonymized way, and they failed utterly. Some other people re-identified individuals, was a big scandal. So that these types of issues happen. They won't be lost, or they won't be going away when you utilize multi-party computation. That's not to be expected, at least. Still, there is a lot of help that you can get from applying multi-party computation in scenarios. In the very beginning, you have a closer look at exactly what information you share, because you need to do that for implementing the technical solution for multi-party computation. And that itself already gives you clear guidance on what type of risk is associated to my data. That's a task that is typically not that often done if you don't have a system like multi-party computation that forces you to think of that. So on that end, it's clearly advantages. On the other hand, we have to have a look at how the, let's say, living law in Europe evolves. We don't just have the GDPR as it is now with all its potential faults or its problems that it might already have. We have some ongoing European data strategy. We have the European Data Act, the Data Governance Act. We have these new upcoming legislations for fostering sharing of data within Europe and across European borders. And that is very promising in that respect. There's lots of things we see there that could definitely benefit from utilizing multi-party computations, and that could definitely try to realize the dream that you have. For instance, the data intermediaries, the concept of the Data Governance Act. Those intermediaries are intended to process data, not in a way that to be useful for some application domain, but in a way to store it and to manage it on behalf of the data subject, of the persons behind. And those organizations would essentially be an ideal point to apply multi-party computation at. They have the capacity, they have the computing power, they might even have the expertise to realize such an environment and to be able to say, well, if you want to share data with us, or if we want to share data with you, let's utilize this or that type of multi-party computation. Those organizations can realize it. Data subjects themselves on their personal computers or personal smartphones, realizing a real complex multi-party computation protocol might be a nice dream of the future, might be some nice apps out there, but I don't see that as the major point of focus on the work. So as I said, there's lots of upcoming legislations and current legislations going beyond what GDPR promises, and their multi-party computation helps a lot. And we already know that evaluations of GDPR currently going on tend to share this view, tend to share this kind of problem with mapping technical distributed systems to single controller models. Think of technologies like blockchain. This is not exactly the standard multi-party computation, but a blockchain also has this problem. Who is the controller? And how do you cater for data subjects' rights? How do you cater for rectification or for right of access in such scenarios? That's a challenge for multi-party computation as well, true, but it can be solved, and that's where we should look for.
Just a quick comment. So definitely MPC makes some goals more amenable to be realizable because you have more control of what is leaked. You're able to not share some inputs. But speaking to the dream you were mentioning, I don't think that there's an MPC chip that you can place in a system to make everything good. So in particular, I want to mention two aspects. One is that the safety, following the comment we just had from Meiko, the safety of the agreed output still needs to be assessed, right? So there's this notion often in differential privacy, for example, where you have this privacy budget, right? So you can do something in an MPC way, but if you do it too often, if you ask too many questions about your data, eventually you might reveal everything. The other aspect, coming back to that point of the different models of MPC that I think is important is, and this is still closely related to GDPR, is with respect to the purpose of data, right? So if you relinquish, if the data owners, namely, let's say, citizens of a country, relinquish their data to some company, and then if that company is going to do an MPC using that data, and if that data has been relinquished, then who has the control of reusing that data for other purposes, for other questions, right? So the aspect of intended purpose is something that I think we cannot inherently resolve with MPC. That will still be related to GDPR, whether or not we use MPC.
If I can just, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, if I can just echo Louise's comment. A lot of the discussions that we get brought into real life applications of where clients are using this, that comment on that the actual output of a particular query can sometimes be more sensitive than the data that's actually put into the collaboration is something that comes up all the time. And it's interesting where we would have previously evaluated the data more distinctly around that was being ingested. But now a lot of the work that we do is actually understanding the query, the limitations, the requirements that are of the actual data output that would be there. And so just to echo, that's something that we find in the real world practical applications happens all the time.
And Ryo, I think you pointed out that standardization could be of great help to kind of provide models and provide clarity and visibility to different parties, how things could be done in the best way. Maybe you can share a bit of your experience. How has standardization of MPC helped to increase its adoption?
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. One method to reduce the complexity is standardizations. And also, of course, I am an editor of the ISO IEC MPC standards, and it makes it can help to reduce the complexity. And mainly, in particular for ISO IEC standards, it can help in choosing algorithms to be implemented. Means that ISO IEC standards do not offer the detailed implementation informations, but provides somewhat good or sufficient algorithms, sufficiently secure algorithms in the standards. So in my experience, the ISO IEC standard can help in choosing good algorithms.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a guideline for building algorithms for specific situations.
Yes.
I see Meiko raising his finger as well.
Exactly. So that definitely is an interesting point. So that's that helps also in several other aspects, because of course it's not just the algorithm; it's all the fixed notation around this algorithm, around the standards and standardization. That helps a lot in terms of transparency. That helps a lot in making sure and visible to all the participants and to external entities and to data subjects and to else how the processing actually takes place. You have standardized algorithms that exactly detail this comes in, this comes out. This is how the algorithm shares the data, and everybody can investigate that, can put it to their data protection authority of interest or to some external researchers and ask, is this really secure? Is this really valuable? Or is this some kind of untrustworthy solution? And they will then be able to identify easily because everything is open. And as was correctly said, in the government area, we might be a little bit more transparent and more open based on the country and based on the legislation. In private companies, we tend to keep everything as secret as possible, not to reveal how we actually do this for business reasons. And that actually is not that easy if you have standards. Standards mean that you must be open, that you must to some extent be transparent about how you handle things. And on the one more benefit that you can get out of standardization is if you perform a risk assessment, data protection impact assessment, for instance, required by GDPR, you must perform one. And if you have standardized algorithms and standardized schemas for multi-party computation, you can easily do the risk analysis for those types once and see the adoption of your particular application domain as the specifics, but the risks themselves that pop out of an algorithm, they won't change anymore. So you can save half the workload. You can make very much more sure that the algorithm holds up to the expectations and to the promises, and your risk assessment will be way more easy compared to developing your own unique proprietary solution with your business partners.
I'd echo that too, and we, as part of our adoption methodology, it's a critical part. We sort of break that up into the three different parts, that being what is the use case and benefit assessment of what you're actually trying to do from that collaboration, what are the legal and regulatory compliances. But the last one, which is probably the more difficult one in the current environment as people start to upgrade their understanding of it, is the technical implementation of it. And especially when you're talking about multiple parties having to actually collaborate together, not just at a data level, at a compliance level, but at a technology level, having those standards is a critical part that needs to be in place.
But is standardization the only way, or the leading way to build ecosystems for adopting MPC? Are there any other good alternatives which seem to function as well? What's your experience?
I would say it's definitely not the unique way of building the ecosystem. In particular, I would say I think there's a feedback loop between standardization and adoption, and which kind of they need to build on each other, right? So it doesn't, at least from some perspectives, it doesn't make sense to make a standard that will not be adopted. It would be a waste of time and energy. On the other hand, we know that sometimes things are not adopted because they're not a standard for them. So I think the development of an ecosystem of MPC, as we're discussing here, will be born or will grow up as a synergy of multiple aspects. So, for example, I would say from a standardization perspective, it is very useful when there are successful use cases of use of MPC, maybe for a very, very narrow application, but where whoever did that can make the case, we could only solve this problem because we had to use MPC. And maybe it was extremely hard for us because there was no standard, but here's at least a successful story, right? And I think that may provide a help for later on other people to also start using MPC, and then eventually government or companies starting to make the case, we're not advanced enough yet because there's no standards, so therefore we should build some standards.
I echo that as well. I mean, we're a cross-functional team. Our team has got privacy lawyers, we've got technical experts, we've got privacy enhancing technology enthusiasts. And what's been really interesting about building that ecosystem is that, and I guess that it's the adoption curve that customers have, and that how comfortable do you feel that you're either the first and the bleeding edge or the leading edge, or is this something that is well understood, well known, and I'm not going to lose my job or our company's reputation for deploying it. And so I think that's a maturity curve type of discussion around it. But I think it's also to that point, going back to the original question, standardization from a technology perspective, that's the ground layer. That's the building block that we need to start driving up that further capability and understanding internally in organizations. I think fundamentally, there is a broad brush education that needs to happen at every single layer of the business environment around what are privacy enhancing technologies. So take away multi-party computation, but you look at all the other capabilities out there. And I think we've got a lot of technology teams that are battling just keeping the lights on for their own environment at the moment, or doing what they need to do just to keep the business doing what they need to do, let alone starting to adopt and use in a enterprise specific way these fantastic new techniques that come about. So I think, just to the question, use cases are going to be critical. Who's done this and where has it been applied, and what have been the learnings from that? And I think, how do we as a community start to educate each other about what those things are happening, about what are the lessons learned from each individual interaction that we've had? And I think one can't happen without the other, of that tight-knit community that really understands and is sharing.
Yeah, I would like to chime in on that actually. So what is definitely needed is lighthouse projects. It will be necessary to have some examples publicly known and transparently shown, publicly annotated examples, how MPC solutions have solved which type of problem. Sometimes it will be something like, this was not possible without utilizing MPC. Sometimes it will be like, hey, with this type of MPC, we have solved that and that challenge, or we have coped with that and that security risk, or we have implemented that and that privacy guarantee that was impossible or not really feasible to be achieved before. So these aspects, these additional benefits that must be highlighted. How did a certain solution, MPC solution, solve problems? How did it solve regulatory compliance or whatever problems that have not been solved in a sufficient way before? Then people will have a look. Then people will have this as a template and check, how will I be able to adopt what they did to my particular use case? And then automatically standardization will follow. We saw that with almost every type of pet, almost every type of technology, basically. First, there were the early adopters showing lighthouse examples, how it improves, what problems it solves. And then we saw pickup, then we saw the standardization. The benefit in the end will standardization again also is, once we have standards and we have standardized interaction protocols for multi-party computation, it's easier to refer to those when interpreting legal regulations. Yeah, so you will never read a GDPR article saying, hey, it's excellent what they people did. You will never read that, but you might read something like a recommendation from the European Data Protection Board. Hey, this standard might be useful for realizing, let's say, cloud computing environments under GDPR constraints when using multi-party computation. So standards will help in realizing and platforming the environment. But of course, for early adoption and for the starters, you need some lighthouse projects to shine.
Maybe one additional concept I'd like to bring in is that we often talk about standards as a goal and adoption as a goal, but the process itself of standardization is also itself something very interesting where there's a lot of learning to do. In some international processes where we ask for various submitters to submit their best scheme, maybe let's say for an encryption scheme, or in this case for some threshold scheme or something like that. As was already mentioned, I think also by Meiko, the openness of the process and the public scrutiny that draws in leverages a lot of expertise, and new findings are obtained during that process. I would say that a standardization process creates a good bridge between academia and implementations or companies, because often we have in academia, that's where the great technical ideas come from often, but they don't really do the full job sometimes of resolving all the problems. They just present the idea, and then when we actually try to do the full scheme from specification to implementation and validation, then we realize we have to make some decisions on what to standardize, how to standardize. And at least I would say we've been having some experience with that as we're building this call for threshold schemes, which eventually will lead to some aspects of standardization. And we realize that there are different takes on the subject. And so, for example, the way you define security, do you want to achieve adaptive security or static security or malicious security versus honest security? And resolving those problems is itself a process that leads to a lot of learning that I think is necessary.
I got at least 4 enablers from your talks. So first of all, standardization as ground, helping to bridge academia and industry. Second, education in a very broadest term. Third, lighthouse projects, examples, inspiration. And fourth, constant learning still from everything. Is there anything I missed? Are we still lacking something in this picture?
Maybe improving legal requirements and legal regulations to be more flexible when it comes to MPC judgments. So that's of course that's a high hope. They won't change laws just for one technology, but we tried in the past to be technology agnostic in the laws of Europe. To some extent it worked, to some extent it didn't. Here I would see some potential for improvement, let's say.
It probably goes from the comment around lighthouse projects, but the other one, the documentation of the business benefit associated with deploying the technology, because I think we can talk around all these different baseline for standards, all the different threshold requirements. But if we're not generating and don't understand intrinsically what is the value that each organization can achieve out of this, there still needs to, the practical application of this still requires a business case to be developed, still requires budgets to be allocated for people to be internally in an organization to be taken off their existing projects to be deployed onto this. And that has an intrinsic cost to an organization to do that. And so a lot of the work that we do, and once again, highlighting those lighthouse projects is, well, what is the benefit that we're actually going to achieve, and how will we actually fundamentally see that at the back of these particular projects? And so I think once we start to understand and can articulate that business value proposition away from just the technical side, that's a huge opportunity for a greater level of adoption.
Maybe just adding a few common keywords related to standardization, which would be best practices, interoperability, and minimum security defaults. I would say that I think the development of standards also has the power to change or promote different business models. So the example here would be that maybe you have a better way of doing things with MPC, but why would businesses do that if they're still selling their products without this better privacy model, and if there's no standards for MPC? Once you develop a standard that shows how MPC is a better way of resolving something, becomes a best practice. Now suddenly, whoever does not implement that is not satisfying these best practices, and so now suddenly, with new standards, you have a new business model, which is to sell your product, to put it in an abstract term, while satisfying new best practice. And so now your new business model will inherently have MPC, just so that you can say you're satisfying best practices. Just to say what I think is also a possible benefit of standards.
So kind of proving that you have a competitive advantage when you use MPC, or because you use MPC in a standardized way.
The standard itself will convey that this is a competitive advantage. And while the standard isn't there, clients might not believe that that's a competitive advantage, because if it was, why is it not standardized?
Is this something that has actually, is this argument something that has worked in practice as well? And I'm now again turning back to Ryo, who might like to maybe involve a bit more, because as I understand, you are heading or you are editing one of existing standards in the area of MPC. Has that really brought this business benefit to companies who rely on this standard? Do you have any feedback from companies in Japan or elsewhere?
Yes, I think that as Luis said, the main benefit for the business side is that customer can trust the algorithms or systems, or in other words, MPC techniques that is secure. Means that without the standard technologies, the MPC is just my company only says this is secure, but a company have doubt this claim. But by using the standardized techniques, a customer may trust our claims. So it is the same opinion with Luis.
So it brings more clarity, more understanding, and yes, this way helps also bring more business, hopefully. I'd like to ask Tim to respond first. So what is your vision for MPC future? How do you see MPC used in the future, and what does it take to get to that future? And when will that future arrive?
It feels like it should have been 30 minutes ago. Listen, for me, the real opportunity that we can start to see is a greater level of understanding and a greater level of adoption. And I think that's shared by every person attending the MPC Alliance conference. I think what's really interesting and where do I see the future coming in is that actually we take away the complexity that is even understanding what the hell multi-party computation is. We take away the complexity around the cryptographic components. We take away all of this. We obfuscate that into a level where we can actually start having organizations and vendors starting building this technology natively into their applications so seamlessly that we start to see it embedded into enterprise applications in a much more broad brush way. And I think in that, when we look at the adoption, that is not just taking away this specific use case, but we see a much greater opportunity in all facets of our life. So actually, do you know what? I'd love to be, we're all gathered around this time next year talking about how no one's talking about MPC, but everyone's using MPC. That would be my ultimate capability. And I hope that sort of makes a bit of sense, but that's where I see us.
That is a dream.
A dream.
Thank you, Tim.
So various thoughts about the future and some echoing some of the things we've already heard. I think education is a very important dimension. So I would imagine that in the future, students in high school would already know what MPC is. Maybe they're not learning the cryptographic details, but they understand the concept. And so maybe I think in the future would be nice if MPC is as well as understood as encryption is today. I think there's one very important aspect, which is maybe not yet so much discussed these days, namely because MPC is not so much used yet, which is, I think it is important in the future that we have mechanisms that prevent abuses of privacy under the guise of MPC and other pet technologies. So, you know, it's not because now suddenly we have an MPC chip or pet chip that things are solved miraculously. The fact that we're using MPC does not mean that we have a good privacy application. It's a bit the other way around, which is we can build good privacy applications based on MPC if it's done properly. So I think that's an important aspect for the future. Another aspect I would like to mention is that I think it's important to have involvement from all the stakeholders. And I still see that MPC and pets is often talked about from the perspective of companies, government, but often not about from the perspective of the users that have their data involved. So I would like to see MPC and other pets technology being taken advantage by users, by themselves who have a better autonomy of privacy because of that. And just maybe a final word, in my perspective, there are still some technological challenges. So MPC can already be used feasibly to solve some problems, but not all of them. But there's also the dream. We've been talking about the dream. Let's say on the academic side, there are still open problems whose resolution may also provide very good breakthroughs. And I'll leave it at that because I think other panelists may also have other topics to mention.
Thank you, Luis. It's a perfect to-do list. When do you think it will become a reality? Your prediction?
You know, I think the future is a long time span, and so you can characterize it as what is the future that we envision today, what is the future that we will see in our generation, and what is the sci-fi future, right? The science fiction that may come in future generations.
Will US be first? And lead the way? Will the USA lead the way and NIST among them?
I think many agencies and institutions have the potential to lead in various areas, to be very generic. I think we have some projects that are ongoing and where I think we have, by we, I mean, I think NIST has good projects that may lead a better understanding on some areas, but I think other, even MPC Alliance is leading in convening various companies to look at MPC in particular ways. So I really don't want to mention that there's one body that is going to lead the way of everything. I think it's a joint effort, and I think the world has to come together to define what MPC will be in the future. So the future is yet to be written.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now to Japan. Ryo, you have listened to us very carefully. What is your prediction for the future?
Yeah, of course, there are many challenges, like Louis mentioned, but I'm a little optimistic. I believe that we will be in a world where MPC is used as a matter of course in case where sensitive and private information is used, such as password leak detections, conversion measurement of advertising, and medical diagnosis using AI, and so on. A part of them have already deployed, so I guess we will see some examples in a few years. But still, because it took over 10 years after Amazon started talking about cloud computing. So I think that it will take about the same amount of time before they are used as a matter of course in widespread use. This is my opinion about the future of MPC.
But your future seems to be much closer. Did I hear 10 years, yes?
Yes, 10 or more.
10 or more. That's optimistic. Thank you, Ryo. And now back to Europe, Meiko.
Yeah, so well, I would like to chime in on what we already said, so that education will be one key point to address. So right now, one of the major problems of adoption is that we have little experts. Yeah, we have not the expertise necessary to realize it in all scenarios. And I would love to see, and I hope that is going to be the nearby future, that all computer science students, that all programmers will learn how these concepts work, that the programming languages will have built-in standardized data program instructions for realizing MPCs automatically, maybe even without any programmer choosing. Maybe we can even come to the point, that's now not the near future, that automatically the system decides for this type of data, for this type of exchange of information, we need to apply these and these multi-party computation protocols. And then the programmer can just say, I want to share this data with those people, do something for me, and out pops a system that does it under privacy guarantees with full data subjects rights, so everybody can have a look. Transparency is ensured, security against the malicious actors is ensured, even let's say malicious governments may be involved that are not able to do anything because of the benefits multi-party computation gives. We have perfect legal compliance with all the upcoming and existing legislation on that end. That would be the dream future, let's say. Let's say for the time horizon, I'm rather pessimistic. So 10 years, in 10 years, we will definitely see some more adoption. We will see more lighthouse projects. We will see more examples, more standards maybe, but we won't get to this dream, to this real excellent, full automatic, full compliant, full privacy protecting multi-party computation platforms around the globe. That will be something like more 20 to 50 years.
Courageous future predictions. I hope we can meet again at least in 10 years time and see and look back to this panel discussion and maybe laugh a bit, because hopefully it happened sooner than we expected. But anyway, I really appreciate your participation and contribution today. I hope you had a good time. I definitely did, and looking forward to the follow-up discussions. Thank you.